Elon. Hi. As Elon said, my name's Tarus Balog. When it comes to open source, I'm probably most well known for the OpenNMS project. We have a booth down in the show floor. I've been working with open source for a rather long time, mainly trying to build a business model around it. And so I discovered that if you want to get your talk approved at conferences, it helps to have a very controversial title, like "Open Source is Dead." That's not really as you can tell, there's almost 3,000 people showing up here today to learn more about open source. So open source is definitely not dead. But what I kind of wanted to talk about was a little bit about the history of open source software, my involvement with it, and how the original perception of open source has changed, and how that previous perception might be dead, and but while open source is really thriving. Now, I got my first computer in 1978. This is a picture from my yearbook. So this is, I think, in '82. So I had this system for a while. It was a 10D Radio Shack TRS-80 Model 1. Came originally with a whopping 4K of RAM. K of RAM. Huh? You only had two? Because okay. This is the only, as far as I know, these are the only two surviving pictures of that TRS-80, and all I can remember is that the yearbook found out I had a computer, had no idea what it was. I mean, they didn't know. Computers are ubiquitous today, and all I can remember thinking is, there's a girl in my room. But so they published these pictures, and so here I had a computer, and what they ended up doing was, this was the caption, and I'm not kidding you, this is the actual caption that's under these pictures in the yearbook. Is catching the latest computer news, Tarus finds nothing phony about his magazines. Okay, first of all, they misspelled my name. I don't have the first U. And I'm like, really, that's how strange computers were back then. They didn't know what to make of it, and so they saw the phone in the picture and made a phone joke. Now they did have an interesting thing about magazines, because back then we didn't have the internet. I mean, the internet was around, but we didn't have bulletin board systems. We didn't have modems. We didn't have internet. We had Hobbyists magazines, and so I actually had to find these two. These are two that I used to subscribe to. One was Creative Computing and Kilobaud Microcomputing. Now, back then, almost by default, all software was open source, because a lot of the computers at the time ran BASIC. BASIC is an interpreted language, and so you'd get program listings. And I would get my program listings via magazines. So every month I would look forward to my magazine, and I would spend hours typing in the program. And then I'd spend hours debugging the syntax errors and other things that I added to the program. But we didn't have this term of free software or open source or anything like that. It was just software. That's what we got. Then fancy. So I'm like 14 at this time. I didn't have much money, but my neighbor got a TRS-80 Model 3, the much nicer one, and there was a thing called C-Load magazine. Came on a cassette. And I apologize for the quality of this picture, but it's about the best one I could find. I mean, this is a picture I had. There's a guy who runs the TRS-80 Museum, and I tried to sell these on eBay for like $1, and no one was interested, so I just sent them to the TRS-80 Museum. I said, here, maybe you can find use for them. So you get this little cover program you'd run, and it had like a table of contents, and then this is Chompers is a game. So there's instructions, and then you'd run a game. And so my friend would loan me, we'd share TRS-80 stuff. I'd loan him I'd compile stuff, copy them to cassette, and give them to him. He would give me C-Load magazine. So this concept of like buying software was kind of strange to me. It wasn't, software, you bought the hardware, software was kind of free. Until I bought my first piece of computer software. It was the it was the Colossal Cave Adventure, which used to live on VAX systems. And Microsoft actually commercialized it, bottled it up, and I couldn't find a picture. This is for the Apple II, but I actually had the one for the TRS-80. And it also, so I didn't, I knew that Microsoft did some basics and some stuff like that, but I had no idea that they would become what they became. But they did, computer games. It's like one of the first things they did. Of course, they ended up putting a weird little disk format on the floppy disk so you couldn't copy it. So I can remember the first piece of computer software I ever bought. I think it was $20, and I bought this Microsoft Adventure, and you couldn't copy it because Microsoft was smart, so they ended up setting it up so you couldn't copy it. Um, so so this is, again, I got my computer in 1978. Most of this stuff that I'm talking about happened in the early 80s, like 81, 82. Now, when I mentioned that we weren't geeks back then, we were hobbyists. And in 1976, a gentleman named William Gates wrote a very infamous letter called An Open Letter to Hobbyists. And I want to put this, as the majority of hobbyists must be aware, most of you steal your software. This is kind of the apple in the Garden of Eden kind of thing, where you suddenly become aware of your nakedness. It's like, what do you mean we steal our software? I get a magazine and I type it in and I make changes and I give it to my neighbor and he does stuff and he gives me stuff. We just share. It's not stealing. But Bill was introducing this concept that hey, the software itself is a commodity. It's a product, and we don't share it. You have to buy it. Otherwise, you steal your software. Who cares on it if you worked on it to get paid? So if we flash forward 10 years later, Microsoft had their IPO. This is 1986. Microsoft came out and had their IPO. I do want to point out, it's kind of funny, is when they IPO'd, Lotus was still bigger than them. So Lotus, who came out with 1-2-3, my dad. So I was the hobbyist. I got the TRS-80. My dad, the businessman, got the IBM. He got an IBM 5150 with 256K soldered to the motherboard in discrete chips. And one of the things he pretty much used it for was Lotus 1-2-3, that spreadsheet. And it was like a godsend to spreadsheet people, and made Lotus lots and lots of money. So here Microsoft did, and I kind of want to point out that, so Bill Gates owned 45% of Microsoft at the IPO, and it was worth $350 million. So the market cap of Microsoft at their IPO was around $800 million. That's a considerable amount of money, especially in 1986. But hold that number in mind, because we're going to revisit this. So here it is. Microsoft has this big IPO. They're making lots and lots of money. What happened to the hobbyists? What happened to this kind of community we used to have and things like that? Well, there was a gentleman up in Massachusetts who we might all recognize, named Richard Stallman. And Richard M. Stallman, and he had this thing that, hey, this is wrong. Software should be free. This idea of compartmentalizing and commercializing and walling off access to software. And so also in 1986, in February of 1986, a month before the Microsoft IPO, he published his list of 4 freedoms. I assume most of you have seen this before, right? This is kind of the definition of free software. So freedom number 0, of course he has to use ordinal numbering. So freedom number 0, the freedom to run a program. You got a piece of software, you can run it any way you want to. I can't restrict how you use the software. The freedom to study how the program works. You got to have the access to the source code in order to see how the program works. Then we get to the third one, which adds this kind of weird twist on it. Freedom to redistribute copies of the program so you can help your neighbor. When have you ever seen any kind of business or any kind of manifesto coming out like this, which has this term, you can help your neighbor? Interesting. It's an interesting take. So free software so you can help your neighbor. And then the freedom to distribute copies of your modified version, so the right to make derivative works. So here is like, you can run the program any way you want, you can see how the program works, you can copy the program as much as you want, and then you can change it and distribute your copies. And it says, by doing this, you can give the whole community a chance. Again, interesting wording. So we're helping our neighbor, and we have this term community. I was like, well, what does community remind me of? Community. Well, it's quite obvious that he's a communist. So open source and free software is always, or free software is always about communism. Viva la revolution. We're going to go out there and we're going to, no business. We're not going to do anything. Help your neighbor. We're communists. Everyone's the same. Openistas. I love this picture. And so I have a T-shirt with this on it. So, it's not, we know that this isn't the case, and one of the people who proved this wrong, and I dug this up of archive.org, this is the first web page of Red Hat I could find. There's Jason's looking at me in horror because he actually works for Red Hat. So, so Red Hat's in North Carolina where I'm from, and they're just quietly going on, and they're promoting Linux. as an operating system and then as an ecosystem and stuff like that. You'd think of this kind of communist idea of free software. How would a company want to make money? How do you make money on free software? So they're kind of trying to figure out a business plan. Now this is kind of, you got to remember, I came from you got your source code magazines and you shared your cassette tapes, and it's kind of this free software thing. And here this guy's like, I'm going to embrace that idea, but I'm going to try to make a business about it. And it's impossible, right? You can't make a business out of it. Yes, sir. This was 96. I think this was like April of 96 was the earliest version of that. I meant to actually put that on there, but yeah, I love archive.org. Archive.org is awesome. Now, I'm sure it didn't look like this. I'm sure there was some other kind of formatting that got lost when they did it. But so it's crazy to try and make money off of free software. I pulled this up from yesterday. So Red Hat's market cap right now is just shy of $13 billion. Okay, that's not chump change. I mean, you got to think that when Microsoft had their IPO, they had a market cap of around $800 million. Now, granted, that was $1986 versus $2015, but still $13 billion. And part of this business, this kind of commercialization of open source software, or free software, we needed a new name for it, because you got this free software is this idea of help your neighbor and give to the community. This isn't about that. It's like definitely every good business wants to give some value to their customers for a reasonable price. I mean, you're not trying to screw your customers. You want more customers. You want your customers to be happy, and you want your customers to feel good about giving you money. So it's not kind of a bad thing, but we needed a new term. Yeah, except for Verizon. It's funny. So there were a few guys involved in this. I've happened to just put the pictures of the guys I've met. But there's John Mad Dog Hall, Eric Raymond, ESR, and Michael Tiemann. Among others, there was Sam Ockman. There were a number of other people got together and wanted to coin this term called open source software. And kind of it was originally embraced by Richard Stallman, and he changed his mind. Which he's free to do, but is this idea of, okay, can we come up with a definition of free software that isn't necessarily about helping your neighbor and giving to the community, something that's a little more business friendly? And so they came up with the open source definition, and I get in huge arguments that free software isn't open source and open source isn't free software. Well, if you look at the open source definition, you can map the 10 requirements of the open source definition to the 4 freedoms. I mean, they are the same thing, but it was definitely a mental change. And part of it that says business friendly, it's like no discrimination against fields of endeavor. I'd seen some people in the free software world put a restriction. So they offered under the GPL with the addition, which they're not really allowed to do, but they'll say no military use. You can't use my software in a military use. Or you can't use it for government features or something like that. It's a very small minority of people do this, but it does happen. And they specifically say, no, you can't do that. If it's open source software, you can't, you've got to have the freedom to redistribute it. You get to see the source code. You get to make derived works. You have to honor the integrity of the original author. You got to give them credit, which I think is a great idea. You can't discriminate. You can't say you can't use it. I mean, I would love to say, hey, if you're a neo-Nazi fascist, you can't use OpenNMS, but you can't do that. It's part of the open source definition. So in my mind, I almost think open source definition is a little freer in a sense than the free software definition, because it expressly states things that the free software definition implies. And so this is kind of a watershed event, because now we have this thing called open source software, and people just grabbed onto this. I would say, in part, the first internet bubble was driven by open source software. In 1995, Netscape had their IPO, which kind of started the internet bubble, if you will. And then it kind of went on. I put this slide up because it's kind of funny. VA Linux registered. They had their IPO, and this was in December of '99. So Red Hat had its IPO in, I think, September of '99. It was in the same year. It was like a few months before VA Linux. And so VA Linux, their price went up almost 700%. on the first day of trading. People were open source crazy, which is funny because this gave them a market cap of 9.5 billion with a B. So we started off Microsoft's IPO. They had a market cap of 800 million. Right now Red Hat has a market cap of 13 billion. And now we're looking at, VA Linux came out and they were worth 9.5 billion. And my favorite part of this is this sign here, or more than half that of Apple Computer. For those of you who don't follow such things, Apple Computer is worth $700 billion right now. So the fact that VA Linux in 1999 was worth more than half of Apple Computers, it's just funny to me. I'm sorry. So at this point in time, my life was not. I didn't do. I was doing commercial software. I was doing a lot of stuff with tools from HP, IBM, network management, because that's kind of what I do. Still liked this idea of open source, but I really wasn't involved in it. So some people I knew started a company called Oculan, and they were the ones who founded OpenNMS. So they started the OpenNMS project, of which I'm one of the maintainers. I started working for them because they I'd always been interested in this open source. The hobbyist in me was like, that was a really fun time to be involved in software. So I got involved, and I started working for Oculan on September 10th, 2001. And so on September 11th, 2001, we sat and watched TV like everybody else. And now the internet bubble was already dying in 2001, late 2000, 2001. I mean, it was not, we didn't have people with huge billion-dollar valuations that were doing free software. But the nail in the coffin to me was 9/11. Like, if I had to put, like, the era of what we've known as the 60s, some people will claim that that's not from 1960 to 1970. Instead, it's from the assassination of Kennedy in 63 to the resignation of Nixon in 72. You can there was a cultural thing. For me, the Netscape IPO was the start of the internet bubble, and 9/11 just put the nail in the coffin. So I started work, free software. I'm trying to build a business around selling OpenNMS as free software in 2001. But we had some guideposts. We didn't give up hope yet. ESR Eric Raymond wrote this interesting book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. It's a little dated now. He talks quite a bit about Netscape, and Netscape didn't end well, I would say. But it was just an interesting idea. There's a lot of goodness. Everyone's familiar with this book, I think. I'm not introducing anything new, I hope. If I am, please run out. It's online. Just get it and read it. But it's this idea that there is a business value to sharing when it comes to technology. This stuff that we did as hobbyists actually can benefit businesses. And so I was out there saying, I don't want you to use OpenNMS because it's open source. I want you to use it because it's open source gives you a better solution. You don't have vendor lock-in. You can, I would talk to some of our customers and I'll say, well, what they were doing is they'd get a particular proprietary piece of software and they'd have to fit their business processes to match the software because it only worked one way. And I'm like, well, no, your business processes are what differentiate you from the other guy. So what you should really do is fit your tool to the business process. And so we started a business basically doing consulting and support because we're still kind of searching for a business model and we're trying to generate revenue. Red Hat, I love this company. It's a great company, but there's not another one. You can't really point. No one's ever really been able to duplicate. I thought MySQL had a shot, but then MySQL got bought by Oracle through Sun, so that's kind of wasn't happy ending. So we're out there, we're fighting the good fight, and we go to these trade shows, and people started coming up to us in these conferences, and they go, yeah, but how much is your enterprise version? Like, we only have one version, and it's our enterprise version, and it's free. And then it's trash. I'm like, it's free software. It's not a free solution. Don't, download it and then expect me to spend a month fixing it for you. You download it, you can either pay me to fix it for you, or you can learn how to use it yourself. But, and I can help you with that if you pay me. So it's not a free solution, but it's free software. But it turned out there were a number of companies that were going out, and they were basically having a little, like a lost leader. They were trying to leverage this open source term as a proprietary software company. So they would give a version that was they called it open core. So it's like, here's our core version, and it does some things, but if you want all these cool features, well, then you got to pay us, and we're going to license it under a very restrictive license that doesn't match any one of the 10 freedoms in the 10 points of the open source definition, or any of the 4 freedoms. And I was trying to explain this to a friend of mine who's a marketing guy. He's not in the business. He's not a technologist. I said, yeah, there's these companies out there. They're saying they're open source, but they're not, and it's really confusing the market because everyone thinks that they have to pay extra for OpenMS. And he goes, oh, so it's kind of like open source. And so he came up with, we actually own fopensource.org, so this is open source definition. But it's a software that claims to be open source but lacks the full freedoms. To me, if you get I can charge you for software. I don't have a problem with that. But once I get it, I should be able to use it under a free license. Red Hat, I came up with this thing called the Centos Test. So Community Enterprise Operating System is basically a group of guys. They get Red Hat. They buy Red Hat Enterprise Linux subscription. They strip out all of the trademark Red Hat stuff. They recompile the binaries from source, and they distribute it. And how did Red Hat react to this? They actually, I think you provide support for CentOS now, I think, is one of the options. Yeah. So it's like they said, okay, fine. Because their core business isn't affected. The people who want to use CentOS aren't necessary. They're not a good fit for Red Hat's customer base. And so Red Hat's able to go and do their thing, CentOS. And to me, if it passes the CentOS test, if I can take your binaries, remove all your trademark stuff, recompile it, rename it. The first time I had to hire a lawyer in my entire business, the first time I hired a lawyer was this company in Orange County called Tyrell. They came out OpenMS for Mac. And I'm like, what? Because at the time, we required Java 1.2, which wasn't available. And you had to have like the developer's kit. So we had a version through this project called Think, but you had to have this special license that got you Java 1.2. And so I'm like, what is it? We don't run on Jaguar because it only uses Java 1.0. Well, what they'd done is they had stripped out all of the stuff that required Java 1.2, recompiled it, and labeled it OpenMS 1.0 alpha, and they were selling, distributing it as OpenMS. And I had to tell them, you can't do that. That's my name. You can call it Tyrell NMS, Bubba NMS, you can call it whatever you want to, but go build your own brand. This is my brand. And so I had to have a lawyer sign a cease and desist letter, and they ceased and desist. But it's one of those things where that was kind of so if you can take it, strip out all of the stuff that Mozilla's the same way. That's why you have IceWeasel on Debian instead of Firefox, because Firefox is a protected brand, and even though it's pretty much identically the same code, that's Mozilla's brand, and so Debian can build their own brand. And luckily this has gone away. You don't see this much anymore. There was an article. Gartner is a big analyst group, and Gartner has this guy named Brian Prentice who I really like. He's down in Australia. Talked to him a couple of times. And he published this thing in March of 2010 called the Open Core, the Emperor's New Clothes. And he basically said, look, if you're considered, probably an open core software vendor is going to knock at your door, talk about all the great things about open source, but their product is a proprietary software product. And so when you're approaching the buying decision, he said, don't buy. He said, I'm not telling you not to buy open core, but you have to treat it like any other proprietary software purchase because you don't get the full value. And this didn't end it overnight, but when someone like Gartner comes out and says, hey, look, your business model sucks. So most of the open core vendors that are still around, you don't see open source. You go to their website, they don't mention open source, which is okay with me. I love the fact HP, Red Hat, Rackspace, we're actually building some cloud stuff right now working with Rackspace because we've dealt with them since we started. But if we don't like it, we have options because it's open source. I can build to OpenStack, and if I want to, I can choose my vendor. And there's a huge power in that. So this idea of being proprietary and building these proprietary things failed in the case of Eucalyptus. Now, Mikos isn't there, and Eucalyptus is probably pivoting and kind of loosening up on some of their things, but they missed an opportunity. To me, OpenStack is it. I mean, that's kind of the cloud environment that people were embracing, and they missed it. It's kind of Betamax to VHS. The genesis of this talk came. I love these conferences. I love things like Scale because it's grassroots. I mean, this is all volunteer organization, and it's huge. I went to the last Linux World Expo. It was called Open Source World, and they literally, after the keynote, they had to get rid of like half the chairs because the few people who were there, we were spread out, and it looked like no one was there. And here, it's like this place is packed, and there's like as I said, I'm glad you came to my talk, but there's a whole bunch of other talks going on right now that are awesome. And so grassroots effort, I really, really like that. So I went to OSCON, and so I was wandering around, and the genesis for this. So OSCON is one of the few open source, like commercial open source conferences out there. And so I'm wandering around the show floor. Again, we got the lady with the blue hair, so I know it was an open source conference. And I walked around, and the first thing you see is this big HP booth. So and they have a big booth here. They're right across from us. And then you've got Microsoft in the corner. HP and Microsoft. These aren't companies you associate with open source software. And then I went, and there was PayPal. I have a friend who works at PayPal up in Portland, and PayPal, huge booth. Again, PayPal, open source. Real cognitive dissonance for me because I'm like, PayPal's not an open source company. But it turns out almost every company now is an open source company. Rackspace, good old Rackspace was there. I actually added a slide yesterday. I was wandering around the exhibit hall, and I found this nice lady. She's at Disney, and she's there at DisneyCareers.com. That's what she's there for. They're hiring geeks. It's never been a better time to be a geek, especially an open source geek, because you can get nice jobs. All of our media is being made into blockbuster movies. I mean, it's just a great time to be a geek. And here's the thing: you want a job? There's tons of I'm hiring, and that was the thing at OSCON. There would be like based on open source tools. So we've kind of found this business model. We found this business model where commercial companies have found its own in their own advantage to hire and use open source tools and developers. But where's the openistas part? Where do I get my free software? Because I'm getting tools, but where do I get my free software? Well, it turns out that all these developers who are working in these free software communities dig it. They like it. And it's like, wow, when I get stuck on a problem, I can just, paste it in Pastebin, and some guy in the IRC channel will say, oh, you need to do this. I mean, I'm not saying it happens every time, but it's this community and building. So what do? They go off and build really cool stuff. So I have a totally different talk about why I gave up Apple and switched to Linux. And I was using a lot of expletives from about 11 to 11:20 as I was trying to translate my my presentation from my Linux Mint Debian Edition laptop to this Apple. One of the things happened is I downloaded, so I got installed, so I downloaded LibreOffice. I'm like, great. So I tried to launch it, and it would sit there and spin, and it would sit there and spin. And it goes, oh, this isn't verified, so I'm not going to run it. So I'm like digging around in the security things, and I had to turn off. If it didn't come from the App Store, and if it wasn't signed by Apple, I couldn't run it. I had to, but luckily there's an option. With the iPhone, you got that option. You got this option. So I was able to click an option and get it installed. And just tons of stuff. I've gotten so used to using that. And again, I use Linux Mint. This doesn't mean it's better than Fedora. It doesn't mean it's better than Ubuntu. It just works for me. And I honestly wish I could actually work on like 5 identical computers, one with each different distribution on it, to see which one I liked more, because you get kind of caught into it. And in this meta, so I have a picture of the LibreOffice of the presentation in the presentation. And then I also have Galaxy Quest, so that's kind of cool. But I mean, I have 2 desktops, I have a laptop, and they're all running Linux Mint. And I had to get I meant to put a slide up here. I had to get a CT scan a while back, and I had the doctor give me a CD with the images on it. And I stuck it in my machine, and it, of course, it had a little built-in Windows app that you could run to see the images. And I just went and found an image file and double-clicked on it, and a little pop-up said, oh, you don't have a program that recognizes that images. But here's 3 choices. There's one called Ginkgo something. So I apt-get installed Ginkgo. Boom, I'm looking at pictures of my skull. It was awesome. For my phone, I'm actually having some issues this week, and I don't know if it's being in a layer or not, but I use the OnePlus One, it's based on CyanogenMod, which is a fork of the Android open source project. My favorite ROM is OmniROM, but they don't support a version of the OnePlus One yet. And I've even promised the developer, it says, if the developer steps up, I'll buy you a OnePlus One so you can use it, because I love the phone. It's amazing. It is the best phone I've ever used. And I've had iPhones, I've had Samsung phones, I've had HTC phones. It is awesome. But CyanogenMod. Now, CyanogenMod is a company, I think they're evil. But when I got this phone, I had root in like 2 seconds. It wasn't like you had to do tons of weird stuff. I had root. So I run on my phone. Again, because it's open source. At my house, I got rid of my Airport Express that was all closed in, and I'm running a thing called Tomato USB by Shibby. He's this guy out in Poland, and he basically puts Linux, an incredibly full-featured Linux that you access through a web browser. So, like, if you come to my house, I live on a 21-acre horse farm out in the middle of nowhere, and I have an open Wi-Fi because you're in my yard if you're using it. But I was able to, with about 4 or 5 clicks, to set up a VLAN that only accesses the internet, so you can't get access to any of my servers at the house or any of my stuff at the house. But when people come over, they don't have to ask me for my very complex Wi-Fi password. They can just, type it in. Again, free. I sent the guy $50 through the PayPals because I really appreciated the stuff he did. If you haven't done so, in my divorce from Apple, and I did do the whole. Is anyone here old enough to remember the I divorced thee, and you threw the dog poop on the shoes? I don't know. Was that enough? Was that? It's a Steve Martin bit from Saturday Night Live, and I don't know if it was on the 40-year thing, but I honestly did because that was with the Apple. It was painful because I was in the Apple ecosystem. All my photos were in iPhoto, and all my music was in iTunes, and all my things were in Pages, and I was like, So the last piece of OS 10 that I had in my house was I had a little Mac Mini that was running OS 10, and I had this thing called iTV, EYE-TV. It's a little USB stick you plug in, and you put your antenna on it, and you get, it's a PVR, a DVR. I think they call them PVRs now, personal video recorders versus digital video recorders. And I replaced it with Kodi. But better yet, I went and got to OpenELEC. OpenELEC are guys who package Kodi on a stick. So you can just plug it in. You got a Raspberry Pi, you go to OpenELEC, you download the thing, you plug it in the thing, you press the thing, and boom, you're running it. And it is slick because I'm anal retentive because I'm a geek, and a lot of us have issues. And so my TV shows, I have them, the name of the show, each season, and then I have each episode in a different folder. Well, Kodi actually went, this is my Constantine collection, which should get renewed, damn it, because it's an excellent show. Not the movie with Keanu Reeves. Let's not talk about that. But anyway, so we got Constantine, and it went through, and not only it found art from each of the things, it went up and it put up a little synopsis, and it was all automatic. And it's free software. It didn't cost me a cent. It cost me about a week of my life because getting the electronic program guide to work is a pain in the butt. But what did I do? I blogged about it and put detailed instructions on how you do it. So I'm helping the community. Again, it comes from this environment that's being driven by these commercial companies, which I think is really ironic and fun. The other thing I had to replace is my weather station. So I have a weather station on my roof, and I don't use the packaged software because it sucks. I use something called WeatherView. I should point out that I live in North Carolina, and the low temperature of 3.6 yesterday morning made me very, very glad I was in LA. And it made me very upset because the lowest temperature I've measured is 3.3, so we didn't even break a record. So, but excellent stuff, and you can customize it, you can change it. It is incredibly powerful. How did I install WView? Apt get install WView. No license keys, no nothing like that. It just installs. It's awesome. I'm almost done. Hey, I'm going to actually finish, and I'll take some questions. One other thing I want to bring about is this guy, and you might have noticed my shirt. I have this I Heart Snowden shirt. I actually wear my I Heart Snowden shirt through the airport. I think it's above the heads of most of the people who work there, except I did get the stink eye from one guy. Kind of glared at me. A lot of our lives, a lot of our personal information and all is being put into these technology devices that we don't understand. It took me a week to get everything right with Kodi, but I learned so much about where the information comes from, how it's distributed, how to go get it, how to modify it, how to deal with it, that I actually feel a lot more comfortable with the system than I would if it was a black box and worked out of the box. I'm back on the Twitters. I was off the Twitters for a really long time, and I'm not on the Facebooks, and I'm not on the LinkedIn because of privacy issues. But we really need to take into account this idea of privacy. As I said, I've got an hour-long presentation on why this is important, and open source and free software allows us to do that. Again, I feel very, very comfortable. I don't have to worry about Lenovo putting in a rootkit on my Windows install and not telling anybody, or doing it so poorly that it's easy to guess the passphrase so that anyone can use it for malicious purposes. Honestly, personally don't believe that people intentionally go out to screw you, but for me, yes, it requires a little extra work. But in my mind, open source is very, very much alive, and it's issues like the NSA, and so we do a lot of business in Europe, and it upticked right after all the Snowden documents leaked because people aren't going to buy something from Oracle and HP or any other proprietary solution. Just having access to the source doesn't necessarily mean, there aren't any loopholes or exploits, but they're a lot easier to find. At least the potential's there compared to, say, an Oracle or stuff like that. And so I think it's kind of funny that open source is very much alive in the sense that the corporations and businesses now know it, and it's a really, really great time to be involved in open source. Anyway, thank you so much for letting me talk. This is my head. I do have a couple of blogs. So anything dealing with open source is adventuresinoss.com. It's kind of my business blog. I did a blog post this morning about this conference. I love this conference. I have a geek blog, Tarus.io, because all the cool kids have .io address. Does anyone else here have a .io address? Because a lot of the cool kids are getting that. Or maybe I'm not cool anymore. And then my hobby is I make vintage cocktails. So I have a cocktail blog as well. But any comments, questions? Was this useful? Did I entertain you? Did I? Okay. Yeah, well, that's how it all started. I mean, it kind of started there. Thank you, folks. Have a great conference, and I'll be around in the booth today and tomorrow. Oh, tonight at 9 o'clock, a friend of mine, Damien Hess, performs as MC Frontalot. He does nerdcore rap, and he's excellent. If you just Google him on the YouTubes, and if you don't believe me, we're giving away complete collections of his CDs. So if you want to stop by the booth an hour before it closes, we're giving away one today and one tomorrow, one set today and one set tomorrow. So check it out. Thanks again. Take care.